Once, in all innocence in the 2nd grade, I asked one of the nuns what adultery was, since it was one of the shalt nots in the 10 Commandments. She told me that subject only applied to adults. That's why they called it adultery. Our next subject is also for adults only. Our cover story is reported now by Seth Doan.
It's the subject of summer blockbusters.
Sex.
Like Sex in the City. It sells magazines.
I have decided the right course of action is to resign.
And destroys politicians.
And I cannot allow my private failings to disrupt the people's work.
It's that salacious subject, sex. Look around. Sex is everywhere. And for Americans, it seems addiction is everywhere, too. Lately, it seems my addiction is to cappuccinos. But can we really be addicted to sex? Before you dismiss the idea of sex addiction, consider these 2 stories. Author Susan Cheever on a journey to understand it, and this man who's asked us to conceal his identity. We'll call him Joe.
How did it all begin?
You know, when I was 14, I thought I invented masturbation. I thought it was great.
Joe says he's battled sex addiction for decades. Adult magazines, prostitutes, massage parlors, and then internet porn.
And it just got worse and worse to where, you know, at my previous job, I was doing it 4 hours to...
You were looking at pornography at work?
Yeah.
He says it ruled his life and ruined his 2 marriages.
When I'm in the mind frame of wanting to do pornography, you don't think about anything else. You really want to... You're focused on getting that high, getting that adrenaline rush.
A rush that seems to be as powerful as it can be difficult to discuss.
People are embarrassed. There's a lot of shame around this subject.
To talk about sex, sexual
To talk
addiction.
about sex, and especially to talk about sexual addiction.
Susan Cheever is the daughter of the late writer John Cheever. Her new book is part memoir, part research project. She doesn't call herself a sex addict, not exactly. But on the other hand, well, there was the sex.
Whenever there was a situation in which I was terrified or panicky, I would often find myself sleeping with somebody who appeared to have power over that situation. So,
for example, when her mother was diagnosed with cancer,
I needed to feel better. I needed to feel less helpless. And
you achieved that by...
I thought I was going to achieve, my mother's good health by sleeping with the oncologist and getting special treatment for her and knowledge for me. And indeed, she's still alive.
Cheever believes that it was not sex as much as the desire to fall in love over and over again that drove her through 3 marriages and multiple affairs.
What makes someone a sex addict?
Well, I think what makes anyone an addict of any kind, sex addict, alcoholic, cocaine addict, is really up to them. Addiction starts with a broken promise. In other words, when you say to yourself, I am not going to sleep with him, I am not going to see him tonight, and you find that you are doing it anyway, you've entered the land of addiction.
Are there, though, red flags that you look for?
Yes, there's very definite things that we look for.
Psychologist Patrick Carnes first studied and popularized the term sex addiction in the 1980s.
There are bad things happening to them. They're spending money they can't afford. They're putting marriage at risk. They're getting sexually transmitted diseases. There's things that are happening.
It's been estimated that 3 to 5% of Americans engage in sexually compulsive behavior. We found that Carnes, who studied the subject for decades, still gets emotional when he considers its effects.
You know, the joke is, well, if sex is an addiction, it's the way I want to go. If you sat in my office and you listened to the tales of woe, I mean, sometimes in an evening I'll come home and, it's hard to even talk.
Why?
Because of just how hurting people are about the problems they have. And I think for people who are out there who think and dismiss it as something that's funny, they don't sit in our shoes.
But hold on a minute. Sex addiction doesn't even exist. Not if you consult this, the Bible of psychiatry. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM. Sex addiction used to be in here, but 14 years ago when this was revised, it was taken out for a lack of scientific evidence.
I think it's a made-up diagnosis. I think it's a diagnosis that has a moralizing component to it.
New York psychiatrist Jack Drescher specializes in gender issues.
The problem that I have is, like the Flip Wilson used to say, the devil made me do it, you know? And so my addiction made me do it is a way to not take into yourself your own wishes and desires.
Meaning?
Meaning that you might want to have more sex than the people around you think you should have.
Dr. Drescher believes that, for one thing, no one's ever decided what the proper amount of sex is. He also believes that so-called sex addiction is usually a mask covering deep-seated issues like alcoholism or drug use or abuse suffered in childhood. Susan Cheever acknowledges that addictions often come in sets. She's struggled with alcoholism just like her father. What do you say to people who would say, come on, sex addiction, yeah, just get over it?
Well, that's what many people think about addiction, period. So, you know, even as people say, well, why can't you just drink less? You know, come on, sex addiction, just get over it. Just don't fall in love again. Just, you know, they don't understand addiction. At the core of addiction is powerlessness.
You are such an inspiration and a help to so many people.
Oh, you're very kind, Sylvia. I appreciate that. We send mixed messages about sexuality. I think we use it, we expose kids to it, we glorify it.
Dr. Drew Pinsky has long kept tabs on Americans' attitudes about sex and addiction. He's been advising radio listeners for almost 3 decades and is host of the VH1 show Celebrity Rehab.
This is where you get stabilize, assess, get a plan, go
Like
forward.
many, he worries about the online world, where porn is available to anyone, anytime, often for free.
We don't even know the full impact of kids having pornography pouring down on them, and we just don't know the impact of that. By the same token, the rest of mass media, not just the online barrage, the tsunami of online pornography, but what's portrayed in the broadcast media is sex without consequences, sex without a context, sex as just something that's arousing and fun, but not something that's part of a deeper human experience, or, by the way, something that has real risk.
A risk that actor David Duchovny very publicly recognized this summer when he announced that he was a sex addict. It was a sort of life imitates art moment, as he currently plays a sex-obsessed writer in the cable series Californication. Duchovny turned to a rehab center for help. Others have turned to a vast network of 12-step programs based on the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. And ironically, the internet, often a great temptation, may turn out to be the salvation for some. Instead of surfing for porn, Joe now uses his computer to get help. All right, so, and how often do you come to this website?
Every day, multiple times a day.
Multiple times a day. He's signed up for a new online program and read us one of his recent journal entries that shows his continuing struggle.
Crap, I'm shaking right now. I feel so guilty and discouraged.
Joe says despite setbacks, he's making progress.
Now my thought is, no, I'm going to have a healthy relationship. I'm going to have a family where I can wake up in the morning and I can be the real me and not wonder, am I going to do pornography today or not?
So in a culture where sex and addiction are both celebrated and condemned, what are we to make of sex addiction? The answer, like sex itself, might not be so simple.
What people are doing sexual often is a window into their deepest wounding or what their deepest desire, who they are as a person. And so our culture needs to see the opportunity in that, and that sex is not the enemy. The enemy is us, and it's what we do with our sexuality.